not just concerns for the opposition, it should be concerning to every right-thinking Bermudian, especially when we come out of a period of time where many people or certain segments of society had question marks as to how the Progressive Labour Party governed their affairs, and now to turn a blind eye to something that is actually worse than any allegation that was brought before the Progressive Labour Party. Well, it's not even funny. It's not even a joke. This is the type of behavior that international observers will then use the term banana republic to describe the country. At no time whatsoever should a public official accept a gift of any kind, whether it's transportation, whether it's accommodation or food, all to which the Premier just admitted that he received from this unnamed investor. The ministerial code of conduct, and for those persons who need the edification of what part of the code, is section A17 and section 18.1. Those are the two sections of the ministerial code of conduct that guides the behavior of ministers when conducting the business of our country. And the ministerial code of conduct indicates that if you are to receive transportation or accommodation of any sort by any group who has any interest in Bermuda, then it's important to reimburse those persons. If it's for transport, you reimburse them at the sum of a business class ticket, sorry. And so, for instance, if the Premier and the AG and the Minister of Transport and Tourism did go on this aircraft to Washington, D.C., then it was incumbent upon them to identify. You could go on Travelocity. You could have called U.S. Airways and found out what is the price of a business class ticket to Washington, D.C. And so then the Cabinet Office or each particular minister from their budget then ensures that that payment is paid to the investors who are interested in Bermuda and offered this free transportation. Now, I'm going to tell you, we have members on my side, in particular one member, the MP Walter Raban, who resigned for less, much less. And so I just asked the Premier, did he receive, and actually it wasn't myself, it was my shadow AG, did he receive adequate advice from our Chief Legal Officer, which is the Attorney General, who accompanied him on the trip as regards to the Ministerial Code of Conduct? And he said no. And so then he said, yes, you can get clarity on it, but it's a lot of confusion. In fact, every time the Premier has attempted to answer pertinent questions regarding this affair, he has incriminated himself even more. It's absolutely ridiculous. And what it is, it comes down to this. The OBA have inflated the egos of their members of Parliament, thinking that they're something that they're really not. And if it's one real dangerous issue that people have to be concerned about public officials, is having that cancerous combination of ignorance and arrogance. Ignorance because you don't know what you're doing. You have no clue what you're doing. But arrogance when you purport that you actually do know what you're doing. And so when you combine that ignorance and arrogance, this is what you have. Something that ruins the reputation of our country at a time when it's absolutely essential to ensure that everything is above board and investor confidence is created through fairness. So people could say, and the Premier could say, listen, this isn't nothing untoward, has nothing been broken. And, I mean, that's ridiculous. Then I asked him how long was the meeting, and he responded it was about 4 or 5 hours. So they flew up on the 20th of March. They spent the whole day and whole night in Washington doing whatever. Then they met on the 21st, and then they returned on the 22nd for a 5-hour meeting with a private jet available. No, listen. The perspective of a private jet is not to save money. It's about the time-money matrix. It's about time savings. So you're not bound by an airline schedule. The aircraft's there for you. So the question has to be asked, what were you doing outside of those 5 hours, which means that you spent 43 hours in Washington, D.C. doing what? And so the Premier said that he was resting. Resting? The Premier doesn't have much work to do now. He's a Premier without any ministerial responsibility. You took a private jet to Washington where you can get rest. You spent the whole day resting. Then you had a 5-hour meeting. And so then you came back the next day and you say you were resting? Absolutely foolishness. Absolute foolishness. And if people try to defend this type of behavior, then I feel sorry for the One Bermuda Alliance, because their time as government is not going to last long. They wish they could make that accusation, but as Dr. Brown, or I think one of the media has already indicated, the story has been ran over the last few days to try and bring a comparison to this behavior and trying to say, well, the PLP did it and Dr. Brown did it. Dr. Brown did take an offer by Global U, who was the advertising partner. They weren't in the process of bidding for anything. They had won the tender, right? And it was to allow him to go to Washington, D.C. to meet the United States President, and then to return to Bermuda for other events that he deemed to be of national importance. What Dr. Brown also indicated is that he instructed his cabinet office to pay Mr. Coleman and the provider of that aircraft the amount of a business class ticket for himself, Mr. Glenn Jones, and his security official, while Mrs. Brown paid the same amount out of her own pocket. You know something? Dr. Brown followed the ministerial code of conduct to the letter of the law, to the T. He did not deviate from what's written. You cannot compare that with what the premier is inside trying to bamboozle the public, supported by, I think, blind, hypocritically blind supporters of the One Bermuda Alliance, trying to say that there was no break of ministerial code when he's not even aware of the ministerial code. So it's apples and oranges, and it's absolutely ridiculous. And at some point, I think that the One Bermuda Alliance is going to have to make a determination should they need to replace their AG, who has actually not given sound legal advice, or should they replace the Minister of Tourism and Transport, or should they replace the Premier of Bermuda? But something's got to happen, because right now Bermuda is being ran by what amounts to be a bunch of amateurs. I'm sorry. Fix what? The deed's been done. It would have been quiet unless it was broken in the local media a few days ago. Nothing would have ever been mentioned about it. And so that's the thing about the One Bermuda Alliance. They are operating under a cloud of secrecy, or cloak of secrecy. And so every time they get called out, we're aided and abetted by the media, it seems as if they're being transparent. They're being transparent after the fact. Transparency means being proactive and coming to the public and letting them know what your intentions are. No, as a government, you cannot be expected to provide all types of information. Some information requires some type of tact and confidentiality. But in this case, there's nothing that they can do. In fact, it's time, resignations have to occur, as far as I'm concerned. This is behavior that would have led to marches on Cabinet building and Parliament a few years ago if we were in that position. But today it's acceptable after months and months of trying to deceive the people with all these slogans about transparency and accountability and everything else, and then the first opportunity you get, you do the exact opposite. That's the sign of a hypocrite. It's the sign of a lack of genuineness, and it shows a lack of ability to be able to govern this country. And in the end, we will suffer. Everyone knows we need to attract capital investment into the country. We agree that gaming is one of those areas in which investors are looking forward to mitigate the risk of their capital investment and to ensure that they can get an adequate return on their investment. We agree with that. But when it comes to governing and ensuring that you have a fair environment that creates confidence, the same buzzword that they used to throw out over the last few weeks is confidence in the economy. The mayor of New York has even repeated that fallacy, right? When it comes to confidence, all it requires is common sense. And unfortunately, that's lacking within the One Bermuda Alliance leadership.